Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben. Today we're taking a look at the Break role-playing game. And I'm very excited to look at this because I have been waiting for this release for about 10 years, because that is how long its two creators have been designing this thing in the background. And I've been following it every step of the way. The copy I have here is the New Aeon Deluxe Edition. You can get the non-deluxe edition as well, but this one has some neat features. It has this really nice slip case right here with a lot of gold foiling. It even has gilt edges, which is insane. I've never seen that in a role-playing game before at all. Here is our back cover. It says the sun machine no longer orbits outer world. Thus the planet is divided into hemispheres of day and night. A few young and ambitious nations have emerged and are attempting to reboot civilization, but most people struggle with day-to-day survival. Ancient knowledge is being rediscovered and weaponized by both the well-intentioned and the nefarious. Creatures, intelligent and bestial, prey on the weak and the vulnerable. A handful of brave and impetuous adventurers wander the planet, discovering forgotten ruins, performing great deeds, and shaping outer world's fragile future. You are one of them. Now, the history of this game really begins as a hack of BXD&D. And as we read through this book, you'll see a lot of that influence in there. But over the 10 years or so of its development, it's really kind of drifted into its own vibe. It has its own system. It has its own feel. But you will see that old school D&D influence throughout it. I should also bring up right away one of the most interesting things about this book, which is the fact that I think it is one of the best looking, best designed handbooks for a role-playing game that I've ever seen, in terms of the layout, the design, the illustrations, how everything comes together to make this gorgeous experience that's extremely easy to use, fun to read, and fast to reference at the table. I think it's really a landmark in terms of that aspect of it. All right, let's take a look inside. This gorgeous foiling that's just all over the book, which is really, really cool. So the writing and rules were done by Reynaldo Madrinian, and editing, design, and art was done by Carlo Tartaglia. This is really the entirety of the team. This whole book put together by two people as this massive labor of love. You'll start noticing right away the very clean and efficient layout with tons of color. This book is really heavy, is something that I should point out, because it has this thick, glossy paper. It's a real brick to hold in your hands. It's also excellently constructed. It's got this ribbon, it's got stitched binding, it has these nice thick hardback covers. The whole thing just feels incredibly premium. Preparing for adventure, we have immediately a 2-page spread that goes into what this game is and what it sets it apart from other role-playing games. Especially something that I love is this section right here, which is if you're a gaming grognard, if you are already into role-playing games, if you've played a lot of them already, this gets you up to speed real quickly as to the kind of game that this is and its basic mechanics. Don't worry, we will be explaining each of these as it comes up in the rules. The main inspiration is things from video games like the Mana series or the Final Fantasy or Zelda, animations like Studio Ghibli or Sword Art Online, The Last Unicorn, Wizards, and old Ralph Bakshi animation. Literature like the ones in Future King or Earthsea, and role-playing games like Stormbringer, Teenagers from Outer Space, and Old School Hack, which is a sort of OSR RPG. And I love here that there's a shout out to the blogosphere, all of the people creating blogs online that really fueled the OSR, especially 10 years ago when this was first being developed. We can also see immediately just from the first couple of pages how great the design is and how easy it is to use. We have these nice bold colored headings that immediately draw your eye. All of the rules are broken down into bullet points and sometimes sub-bullet points, so everything is very organized in a hierarchy that's easy to reference. There's also a ton of art throughout this book, hundreds and hundreds of illustrations. There are some pages that have a dozen pieces of art across a spread because every single special ability, say, will have its own little piece of spot illustration. Those 10 years of work really show off here. There's also random dice rolls on the side over here, which is really fascinating. So you can go to a random page to get a D20 roll. And there are page references everywhere throughout the book. It is one of the most heavily page referenced books that I've ever seen. Anytime a mechanic comes up, especially one that you haven't seen before, it immediately tells you where you can read more about it. It's fantastic. The first big chunk of the book is character creation. Character creation actually doesn't take that long because there are ways to randomly generate each aspect of it, but there are plenty of features at each step along the way. So if you wanted to, you could really get in depth in terms of the different builds, but that is completely optional. You could just streamline and randomize it. Before we check that out though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by the Basics collection of our awesome long-term sponsor, Into the AM. I've become a huge fan of all of their clothing, and I've been wearing it for years now at this point. Their new line ranges from basic tees, like the one that I'm wearing right now, to long sleeve tees, to fleece joggers, to polo shirts, a really big, nice selection of basic apparel, and it is super comfortable. It fits really well, and I can tell you, because I've been wearing this for years, it is really sturdy. It does not seem to wear out. Check out all of their apparel using the link down in the description below, and if you use my link, you will also get 10% off of their entire web store, and that's on top of any other sales they happen to be running, which is pretty awesome. Thanks again to Into the AM for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. All right, creating a character. I love how immediately there's a whole bunch of examples of what different characters might look like to really get you in the headspace of what your PC is probably going to look like or the different options that are available. And we have a summary right here, and then we jump into each of those sections. First, you're going to select your calling, that's like your class, then your species, that's like your race, your homeland and your history, your traits and a quirk, and then a few finishing details. Over here, we have a breakdown of all the different chapters in this section, and we'll also see later on that there will also be subheadings down here. So just by looking at the side of the page, you can immediately find out where you are in the book and where nearby sections are so you can get to them quickly. So here are all of your callings or classes that you can select from. Immediately, there is summaries on these 2 pages covering your 8 basic callings, and then it'll get into more detail later. That's what I love about the design of this book. Anytime there's a new section, the beginning of that section immediately summarizes everything that you're about to look at before you see it. So there's always this very strong anchor point that tells you what's coming up ahead so you can anticipate it. And I really like that. If you want to, you can randomly generate which class you want, or you can just pick one. These are the factotum, which is interesting because it's one where it's not combat focused. It's someone who does everything else. There's the champion who's like a warrior, the sneak who is a sneak, a raider who's a little bit like a ranger. You have your battle princess, a murder princess, a sage who's like a wizard, and a heretic who's more like a summoning-based magic user. You can see that each of these has 5 different, ability scores. That's what they would be in D&D. They usually range between 6 or so up to maybe 10. They also have an attack value, a hearts value, which is like your hit points, defense value, which is like your armor class, and a speed. If you've played any form of D&D before, especially old school D&D, most of the rules of this game will be pretty intuitive, although there are some interesting twists, especially as to how damage works. Since only a D20 is used throughout the entire game, there are no other dice. I love how every once in a while it breaks out into these short little kind of comic book segments that makes you feel like you're in not a video game, more like an animated movie. So let's look at how a class is broken down here. Like the factotum, for example, you have typical factotums like a merchant, explorer, courtesan, or just normal common folk. You have special abilities, you have how the advancement works, and your aptitudes, what weapons and armor you're allowed to be, and who would like to be a factotum. This is really great for new players to figure out what class is right for them. This calling is great for players who like to catalog and scheme or invent and create interesting items. Because as we'll see later on, crafting is really a big part of the game, or at least there's a whole system for it for people who love to dig into that. Everyone starts with 3 basic special abilities. Some of the main features of the factotum are things like you have this giant backpack, so you can carry way more material than everyone else, and people tend to ignore you in combat. So you can do other strategic things in the background while your friends are fighting the enemy. As you level up, and there are 10 levels essentially, or ranks, at levels 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, you can choose a new special ability. So we have standard abilities here, like folklorist or healer's hand, social learner, and then starting at rank 6, you can start picking advanced abilities, which really crank up what you're able to do. For example, if you pick pack tactics, it actually turns your giant backpack into a weapon or a shield that you can use in combat, which is a really fun twist. I love how much graphics and charts are used all throughout this to make it very visual how each of the classes works. What armor you can have, what types of melee weapons you're allowed to use, what missile weapons, and your advancement table. It's all on one page. You can see at a glance how the character works. The sneak's main features is that you have sticky fingers, so it's very easy for you to pickpocket things off of people. You're always kind of in stealth mode. And you're light-footed, which means you can move through terrain that impedes others and scale surfaces with deceptive ease. So if you like being very mobile and sneaking around the battlefield, grabbing people's weapons and stabbing them in the back, this is the right guy for you. Some of the special abilities are just really fun. Like for this one, Borrowed Blade, you can attempt to redirect a failed attack roll against you into another target if they are in the offending weapon's range. So someone tries to stab you, you just sort of parry the blade and it stabs another guy. We have the champion, who is your standard fighter character. His main abilities are things like combat momentum, where you can kind of chain attacks together to get those bonus attacks. You have your favorite weapon, and Into the Fray allows you to choose different combat styles throughout a combat, depending on what you need to do in a given situation. Some of his more advanced abilities are things like being a giant killer, and there are rules for fighting and climbing behemoths later on in the book. You can go into berserk mode if you want to be more of a barbarian, and you have things like roaring spirit, where you can attempt to subdue opponents of lower rank with a menacing glower. So you make the correct check, and you just terrify enemies within shouting distance, and they just won't attack you because they're so frightened. The main features of the Raider are that you are really fast, you have Hunter's Focus, so you can focus on one enemy in battle to make it much easier to hit them, and you can sidestep. So once per fight, you can sidestep an attack or ability that would normally have hit you. As you level up, you can do things like getting an animal companion, and you can even do stuff like become a spell cutter, where your strikes can damage and deflect spells that are thrown at you, which is very cool. The Battle Princess has abilities like Heart's Blade, where you can pull forth a magical weapon from your own emotions, from the wishes in your heart, and it can manifest in different ways. You can also summon a Shield of Love and a Soul Companion, and there's rules for generating these companions and how they work later on. Later advancements include things like a battle dance, where you can coordinate all of your friends to fight throughout the battle like it's a choreographed dance, which is a fun idea. You can have Spirit Wings, the wishes in your heart allow you to soar, literally. Or Never Stand Alone, where you're in mortal peril, maybe alone or outnumbered. You can use this ability to summon help, so a character that you have had a bond with will miraculously show up just in time to help you. The Murder Princess is like a dark version of the Battle Princess. You have, instead of the Heart's Blade, you have the Wrath's Blade, and things like Withering Glare and Tenacity. Your disdain for your foes can be so intense that it can increase your unarmored defense by +4 if you're not wearing any armor. And you can even summon storms of magical swords that appear around you and tear through your enemies. The Sage is the wizard. They have a giant grimoire, which can appear or disappear at will, and can also provide you with clues as to information in the game world if the game master wants to provide that to you. You have a Sage's staff, which allows you to basically have Mage Hand, where you can push things around, and it can always glow with light. And you have Prestidigitation. All the different special abilities are essentially different spells that you can cast, like Divination or Glowing Ink, Hocus Pocus, the very useful Cloud, Eldritch Explosives, the Cloak of Obscurity. There is not as many spells as you would find in D&D, because there's just a number of special abilities right here. But it does focus on being very versatile, and there's not as many attack abilities as we see in D&D. It's a lot more utility focused, I think, which is something that I like a lot. You may notice that on some of these abilities, there is a B or a D for gain one Bright Allegiance or one Dark Allegiance. This is kind of like the order and chaos spectrum that we see in early D&D, where it's not really about your personality, it's more like your allegiance to these kind of cosmic forces. As you pick special abilities that have these points, you keep track of it, and that can influence special abilities you have. It can influence how certain creatures react to you, but it doesn't really dictate how you have to act. The Heretic is like the summoning magic class. Your abilities are Fitful Sleep, where you have weird dreams where the game master can give you information. Dreadful, where you're spooky looking, so it's good to intimidate people. And Squire Marlowe, which is a kind of basic summon, a servant that appears that can do simple things for you. He can fight, he can retrieve things for you, basic stuff, but of course you can get very creative with that. The really cool features of the Heretic are all of the neat summons that you have, and some of them are quite powerful. Like this one allows you to control enemy characters. This one lets you chain them up. Some of them just blast your enemies. The twist with this is, in contrast to the Sage, when you make checks to cast these spells, if they go badly, then that summon can punish you. Here's illustrations of all of your different possible summons, all the way up to this giant cosmic dragon. Next up is your species, and there are, I believe, 11 different species. Again, you can randomly pick which one, or go through this and choose them for yourself. When you're creating your character, you do not randomly generate your ability scores. Those are automatically set by your class or your calling, but those are modified by the many different choices that you make going forward after you pick your class. So for example, if you pick a goblin, then you have -1 might, +1 deafness, +1 defense rating, and 8 base inventory slots. Some of the different species are variants of each other. So you have your basic human that's native to this world, but there's also human that's a dimensional stray. So a human from our universe that has made their way into this fantasy universe, if you want to play a more isekai focused game. You have Chibs, which is kind of this world's version of hobbits or halflings, Tenebrates, which are kind of like dark elves in some ways, Rai Neko, which are the cat people, the Prometheans, which are like these 8 or 9 foot tall giants, these kind of perfect humanoids. They have things like supernatural strength, and they can even grow back limbs that get severed off. Because yes, there are tables for different types of injuries that you can get. Grunts, which are a combination of kind of an orc and a troll. Goblins, everyone knows what a goblin is. You have your dwarfs. You have your elves, which are very pointy and tall compared to your standard D&D elf, and your biomechanoids if you want to be a robot or a golem of some kind. Step 3 is your homeland and your history, and this picks things like the bonus languages that you know per reviews, which are useful areas of knowledge earned from past experience, and what your starting gear is. If you want to do this randomly, first you would roll over here on this chart because there's 4 major regions in the world. We'll see that once we get to the main map. And then within each of these regions, you're going to roll on further tables to sort of figure out exactly where you are from. The main regions are the Wistful Dark, Twilight Meridian, the Blazing Garden, and the Buried Kingdom. As I mentioned on the back of the book, this is a world where the sun is stopped in the sky, so there's sort of a day, twilight, and night parts of the world, and that's what these correspond to, and this is the underground world. So if you rolled up the Wistful Dark, this is an abstracted version of the world map. There are 12 different histories within that region that you can be, and these determine what you have done up to this point before becoming an adventurer. Perhaps you were a Nightwall Yeoman. Your purviews are spotting what hides in the darkness, staying focused even while rushing, finding a weak point. So you're going to get bonuses on those when you take actions that are related to them. And you get some starting gear that you can pick too from. I love how the many different languages that are spread around this fictional world also have scripts that are spelled out here so you can see what they look like. Twilight Meridian backgrounds, things like a silk tailor, medicine peddler, merchant scion, black glove cavalier. The Blazing Garden, this is where it's bright sunlight all the time. You might be a beast handler or a village runner, worm-blooded, a hinterland noble. And down in the Buried Kingdoms, you could be a tunnel crawler or an honored laborer or a comrade agitator or an apprentice thinker. The final twist is that your character could be from our world if you're a dimensional stray. And that means you have backgrounds from our world, like things like being a retail or service employee, or a white-collar worker, or an education in the faculty, or maybe you're just the idle rich, where you're very good at keeping eyes on you, maintaining an air of superiority, deserved or not, and getting what you want. Now, step 4, which is traits, is very straightforward. You're just rolling on these tables. You get 2 positive traits and 1 negative trait, and these just give minor bonuses and penalties to your initial ability scores, just to tweak those slightly so that they're not going to be the same, even if you have 2 different characters that have the same race and class and background. You're still going to have that mixed up. Your character is also going to have a quirk, one thing that really sets them apart, and that's going to be based on the kind of species that you picked. So inheritor species, old world species, and biomechanoid species. And those are called out in the species section. All of these have positive and negative features. For example, you could just be boring. The advantages is that an insight check is required when someone is trying to recall if you were present at an event or situation. And disadvantages are, if you're placed at the scene, your actions will be attributed to another, including any positive or heroic deeds that you performed, because no one can seem to really remember you. Maybe you're adorable, or you're a big eater, or you're a mage breaker, or you have beast tongues. Perhaps you're a dreamer, or you have peculiar tastes. If you're a robot, you might have utility servos, a buster arm, bioskin. If you want to be a Terminator type robot, that's fine too. I love how part of the finishing details here are things like coming up with a name for your team, an emblem and a dress code, or coming up with a motto or a team chant for your party. That can be a fun thing to put together. The next big section here is on gear, and it's quite extensive because it covers really everything. The monetary system is that 100 stones make a coin, 100 coins make a gem. This is a slot-based inventory system, which I highly approve of. It makes it very easy to track how much you're carrying, and it makes what you're carrying meaningful. It covers everything from all the different weapons that you can carry, along with, of course, illustrations for everything. So you can actually picture all of the different item types that you might want to take along with you. There's some rules here for combat, but we'll cover that once we get to the actual combat section. There's rules for different custom types of weapons, combining different kinds of weapons together. All your types of armor, light armor, heavy armor, super heavy armor, with fun variations like Dreadnought Plate or Hex Plate, Soul Elite's armor. Custom armor abilities. This book really goes into allowing players to tinker with and customize a lot of their equipment, more so than I've seen in most role-playing games. And that is really impressive because you always have that one player that wants to get into that feature of the game, and this really enables it. Kits, books, consumables, chemicals, artifacts, gadgets, other world items. So if you come from our world, you can bring a Game Boy with you into this world. And strangely enough, the features in the Game Boy, or I think it's called the Game Gal, is the slightly rebranded version of it. A lot of things in these video games you brought with you seem to make a lot of sense, or they fit with this world pretty well. So it can actually give you clues and information about it. It doesn't fit one-to-one, but it's interestingly close. Picking up followers and recruiting them. There's different classes, like you have a scamp, a scholar, a guide, a custrel, your 4 main different types of followers that can help you, navigate or fight, all your basic stuff. Standard pet types like the growl, the buzzer, the pudge grub, and the fuzz coil, the scree, the purr, the jumbug, the moko doe. I mean, this is clearly from, Final Fantasy. Look at all these different great creatures that you can pick up. That one's kind of disturbing. There's even rules for getting vehicles, how to pilot them, what kind of fuel they use, how much crew they have, how much they can carry. Anywhere from these ships to sail around the ocean to, of course, airships, very Final Fantasy. Now, this section covers character rank, which is levels. And this is important because this tells you the kinds of things that you are doing in the game. It is XP based. There are 10 levels. Once you have enough XP, there's a chart on your character class or calling that tells you exactly how much you need. Then you're going to go up a level and you'll gain a bunch of advantages. How you gain XP is basically like this. You gain 1 XP for every hour of real-time play that you play the game. So maybe your 3-hour session, you get 3 XP. And then you can get bonus XP for accomplishing objectives or achievements. And these are set by the players or set by the game master. You have to come to an agreement on how much XP different things are worth, and then you get awarded those at the end of the game. So maybe 1 XP could be defeating or pacifying more powerful or numerous opposition, or 2 XP might be demonstrating excellent teamwork during the adventure. 3 XP might be completing some grand multi-session adventure or endeavor. But of course, this can be set with the group. So you want to make a very exploration-focused game, then maybe the more locations you reach, the more XP you get. You could set XP bonuses for recovering treasure if you want to have a more old-school D&D flavored game. That's really going to be set by the group. The charts at the back show you need 168 XP to get all the way to level 10. So if you're getting, maybe 4 XP per session, then that's going to be about 42 sessions to get all the way to level 10. The last section here in character creation just covers what happens if you have too many bright points or dark points. You start getting mutated slightly as you move more towards that alignment. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just flavor for these different cosmic forces that you could ally yourself with. All right, playing the game. Here's the actual rules that you're going to be using. Like I said, very similar to D&D, this is a D20 based game. In fact, D20 is the only die that you are going to need to use. The basic rules are that when you make checks, you are just taking a D20 and you're rolling under your ability score. These are probably, around 6 to 10 early on, but of course they can be improved as you level up. When you are doing combat, you are rolling a D20 and you're adding a bonus, trying to hit their defense, which is their armor class, and then you're dealing damage. Rather than having your 6 normal ability scores like in D&D, here we have might, deafness, grit, insight, and aura. Aura is kind of like your personality and your presence, whereas insight is all of your intelligence and parts of your wisdom all rolled together. It's also possible to have contests where you pit one of your aptitudes against an aptitude from another character. So you might have deafness versus might, which is be used for precision against power. In that case, you're both trying to roll underneath your aptitude. And if one person succeeds and another person doesn't, then that person wins. However, if they both succeed or they both fail, there's a number of tiebreakers here. I have to emphasize again how well laid out this whole thing is. Everything is broken down into this control panel format where all the rules are focused on one page or on a 2-page spread, so you rarely have to flip pages at all. Each step is carefully broken down into these nice big chunks with bullet points. It's so easy to internalize all of the rules here. I never felt lost or confused while I was reading the book. There's also built-in subsystems for all of the major things that you might do besides fighting in a D&D or fantasy adventure type game. So for example, journeying. You're going to do overland travel. It's pretty much going to be a point crawl. So this is a very simple point crawl, but you could have ones where there are webs of different locations and you're moving from one to another. Are you traveling along a path, a road, a waterway? That's going to tell you how fast you're going to move and how likely it is that you're going to get lost. Diagrams and illustrations like this are fantastic for just internalizing all of the rules really quickly. Here's some things that can happen if you get lost. Maybe it takes longer to get there. Maybe you end up in the wrong place or you end up back where you started again. Some of these I think could use a little bit more structure. Like this one, for example, when you go to the wrong place, it doesn't tell you where that is. There's no way to randomly determine it. The game master just picks it. Personally, I would like that to be a bit more procedural so the game chooses, but that's easy to fix. There are procedural rules in here for exploring locations. That's really important if you have an exploration or a site-focused game where it's all about the locations and the places that you're going to rather than the sequence of events that's planned out for you in terms of an adventure. And this is very much a scenario or a site-based kind of game. Areas that you're exploring are typically set up as point crawls, kind of like the overland maps. You pick your PC positions in the marching order, essentially, rear guard, observer, vanguard, or scout, and each of these has particular roles to play. Scouts can find out what's happening ahead of you and report back if they roll really well, otherwise they might be stuck there with a dangerous enemy. And the different positions in the marching order determine what you are likely to notice, so that can be important as well. You can choose the type of movement that you're using. It might be cautious movement, where you're being very thorough, where you find all of the hidden items, details, traps, and so forth, but you're noisy and you can attract attention. Hasty movement, where you're moving fast, but again, it's noisy and you're going to attract attention. Or you can go into stealth mode. What's interesting is that there's actually two different kinds of encounters in these maps. You have your guardian encounters, which are monsters that are stationed in a particular place, and you have wandering encounters. And there's two different tables for those. So the movement that you're choosing can help attract guardian encounters. However, when you're at a location and you want to inspect or linger there, that can attract wandering encounters. I really appreciate how this book uses these rules where inspecting doesn't require a roll at all. If you are just taking this action and you're taking the risk of attracting wandering encounters, then you simply find everything that's hidden in a location. It makes the player's choices much more concrete and less, I don't know, maybe this will help us, maybe it won't. It's like, no, we are taking a very specific risk here. We might be found by enemies, but we will find everything there. And that makes it easier to plan when you are exploring. There is a whole system here for negotiation. It recommends that you don't use this anytime that you talk to any NPC, but for very high stake stuff where it's really critical what is the result of this negotiation, then you can break out these rules. You can choose which tactics you want to use, whether physical intimidation or reasoned debate or charismatic appeal, and that's going to adjust which of your your aptitudes, that's what it calls them, you're going to be using against your enemies. You can bring in different influencing factors to try and sway things to your side. So there's a lot of neat little tactics that you can use here. And of course, we have the fighting rules, which everyone wants to know about. So you're going to roll a d20, add your attack bonus, try and hit their armor class. If you hit them, they lose 1 heart. That's pretty much what happens when any weapon hits. There are some weapons that do 2 hearts of damage instead. Weapons are further differentiated by often having this particular threshold where if you roll high enough on your attack, then it does an extra heart of damage. But where that threshold is varies on different weapons. Battlefields are all zone-based, as you can see over here, and the speed of your character determines how fast you can move between zones. So normally you can move 1 zone, but if you're really fast, you can move 2 zones. If you're especially slow, you can't move at all unless you use your move plus your action to move to another zone. Melee attacks hit anything in your zone, and of course, ranged attacks can hit things outside of it. You can also add different area conditions to the different zones, like maybe this area is harmful or precarious or sheltered, which can modify it and make you want to move from one place to another. So it's a little bit more abstracted than I tend to prefer. I like things a little bit more tactical, but that would be easy to adjust. In terms of how initiative works, it's really simple. Whoever started the fight is going to be going first. That whole side goes, then the other side goes, and you just go back and forth like that. Real simple. That's how I prefer it anyway. I love that there are rules for attack stunts as well as combat tricks. So attack stunts is when you're attacking and you want the attack to do something beyond just doing damage. Like maybe you want to damage them and also trip them. In a case like that, you would say what you want to do, but the game master would tell you what negative effect would happen when you fail. So there's a possible trade-off there. A normal combat trick could be something like, I just want to pull the guy's cloak over his head. Really simple stuff that doesn't necessarily involve an attack or damage. And in that case, it's usually a check of some kind. I love that there's a rule for fleeing. So if you decide that this is going against us, you can all just decide on your group's turn, we are just going to flee now, and you all just book it out of there. How does damage work? Well, once your hearts get down to 0, then you start taking injuries. And there's a whole big injury table over here. Your first injury would only use the things that have green on them. So you'd roll a d20, and it could be anything from here to here. But your second injury is going to use the orange numbers, and your third injury and higher is going to start using the red numbers. So by the time you start getting into orange and possibly into red injuries, death starts getting on the table. These can also start having some permanent effects, like having severed limbs that you're going to have to either just live with or maybe find a way to get a prosthetic later on. There's possible options there, but there are some permanent consequences for getting too beat up in combat. Despite the very happy, cheery, kind of anime-inspired look, this is a game that takes combat and death and consequences very seriously. There's even rules in here for sundering things. You can quickly figure out using these tables how many hearts and what the AC or defense is for different normal objects like weapons or armor that enemies are holding if you want to try and break that stuff. Really simple, quick rules for figuring that out. And colossal combat. There are some monsters that are giant behemoths, and each part of the monster is its own zone. So you can move from zone to zone by climbing it and trying to damage those areas. And by damaging different areas, you cripple the monster in different ways. You're trying to get to its main weak spot or its core point, which is also labeled on it. So a really easy way to do Shadow of the Colossus style combat. Plenty of rules with different kinds of perils, like being chibbed or disoriented or fatigued, putrefied, starved, toppled. And downtime. I know how many old school players love downtime systems, and there's a lot of them in here. If you want to just hang out in town for a few weeks, which you often have to do to heal your injuries anyway, get into some downtime activities and get more immersed in the world. There's rules for crafting, healing injuries, identifying relics, preparation, recruiting, reputation management, researching adventures, socializing, taming, training your companions, or even a unique endeavor. You can sort of summarize side quests that your characters are doing as a unique endeavor during downtime. You can also keep track of your social bonds with other characters, and having the right kind of bonds with them can give you bonuses when you take actions that are reflected by that relationship. And you can track your reputation and how the world thinks about you. As I mentioned, the number of resources for crafting is quite extensive. The rules themselves, in terms of how you do it, are pretty straightforward. It's summarized on one page, but there's many different things that you can do with it. You can get into alchemy, you can get into artificing or cooking or forging, gadgeteering or tailoring, repairing, customizing stuff. You can take a lot of the weapons and armor that you found and reforge them into all sorts of new and weird things if you get clever with it. All sorts of crazy materials that you can imbue your weapons with, like dew silver or sky steel. Each of these has strange little properties, but of course you can get outside the box and come up with your own inventions as well. Here's some additives which you can use to imbue your weapons with power. So for example, if you put a prism feather and imbue it into your weapon, then shields that have this can parry twice per fight rather than the usual once, or items that have it increase their speed rating by 1. Putting a trapped song into an item might grant you an edge on all negotiation rolls. But there are dangers. If your crafting goes badly enough, there can be mishaps, complications, side effects, or even curses that could go off if things get real bad for you. I love this little note down here. Ask your GM if you can deliberately infuse your creations with one of these unwanted mishaps. Chapter 3 is the Outer World. This is a summary of the whole setting, and the setting is an entire planet. So there is a lot of land to cover here, and this only covers it kind of in the basic details. You get a good sense of all the different regions and what might be found there, but not enough that you could actually play there directly. This game does not include a starting adventure, although I believe that is in the works to be kickstarted later. I do appreciate that it doesn't just bombard you with a huge amount of lore. It basically has a one-page spread here where it goes through this ancient scroll that summarizes the most important events from the past, but things are a little bit vague and allow you to fill in some of the gaps. Here's a map of the entire outer world. I love how the projection is a D20 projection, right? Because there are 20 triangles right here. If you folded it all up, it would become a D20. I don't think the world is literally a D20. It's just a really fun way to show the projection. The Wistful Dark is over here, the Twilight Meridian's in the middle, and the Blazing Garden is over here. And each of these locations gets a write-up. So the Wistful Dark is the furthest continent from the Sun Machine, a dark and melancholy realm filled with an equal measure of fear and hope. The overview doesn't get into a ton of detail, but the elements that it does give you are very evocative and really paint a picture. So for example, the environment is cool and crisp, and the living see their breath in the air. The landscape is eerie yet alluring. Restless mana and bioluminescent fungi provide respite from the dark. The presiding silence is broken by keening spirits and the low groans of the discontented. The heaven seal can be seen in the darkening sky. It's cracking. I love how these little elements remind me of the Nazca of the Valley of the Wind manga. Each of the different locations within the Wistful Dark has a short little write-up here where it has typical adventures that you might find there, like escort nomad caravans, battle with the cursed and corrupted, or contend with toxic environments. The Twilight Meridian, on the cusp of dusk and dawn, the Twilight Meridian has no dominant landmass, but is instead a series of diverse and interrelated islands. So we've got a big archipelago right here, lots of traders, and you have the Blazing Garden, bathed in the glory of the Sun Machine. The Blazing Garden is a bold and bombastic place full of larger-than-life characters and creatures. So you got jungles, you have deserts, you have these kind of like Aztec temples, you have the height of civilization is going to be in this area. And the last main region is the Buried Kingdom, the whole Underdark, so to speak, that can be accessed through, 3 of these different triangles, sections of the map. And of course, you can explore other places as well, like trying to get beyond the heaven seal that's up in the sky, that's sealing away a lot of these powerful divine beings. You can go to the other world, go to our world itself, right? Find a portal to the normal world and have a little bit of an expedition there trying to pass as humans. Section 4 is the Game Master's Guide, and I love how practical it is. It doesn't have a lot of just very vague generalizations about what it's like to be a game master. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of here's what you do. During a session, what does the game master actually do? What happens if a PC dies? How do you make up your own rules? How do you collect feedback afterwards? And perhaps most importantly, how to create an adventure, the most important thing that a game master does. What are the components of an adventure? You have game master characters, you have settlements, you have adventure sites, adventure maps, and you have encounters. What are the different types of game master characters? Villains, quest givers, rivals, service providers, allies, basic folk, and interesting characters. What do you need to think about when building those? And then it gives you tons of examples of doing just that, along with things like rivalries or what their allies are, role-playing notes, what their abilities are, the things that they tend to say, right? Their catchphrases that make them memorable. And there's random tables to help you generate some more. There's plenty of random tables actually all throughout this Game Master's Guide, which are quite good. I enjoy them, although I wish they were longer and more extensive, but that's me. I love my big random tables. Of course, if you had my book, Knave 2nd Edition, shameless plug, then this has tons of D100 random tables that you can use in any role-playing game to flesh it out even more. Lots of guidance on how to go about constructing your own settlement with examples of that and random tables. How to build your own adventure site, again, with examples, though they're often very weird, right? It's not your standard dungeon. This dungeon, so to speak, is you crawling through the ruins of this giant biomechanoid creature. So it really encourages you to go out of the box when you're coming up with this stuff. The outer world, this whole setting, is very weird, and you can really mix and match fantasy and sci-fi things together. How to design locations and rooms and traps and things like that are inside these larger adventure locations. Maybe it's an environmental hazard like this warped meadow, or just flavor like the Hall of Truths. Think about what happens if the players inspect it really carefully. What happens if a battlefield breaks out here? Where are the access points? How do you get in and out? If you were going to zoom out, what would be the process for creating a larger adventure map, right? A bigger point crawl that you players can navigate through. You want to have locations that are off the map where they can find if they try and bushwhack their way through the forest or if they get lost. How do you make varied and interesting encounters that aren't always just about combat? I love how there is a reaction table here, another hallmark of old school D&D, that allows you to make sure that when you're running into these creatures, you don't always know if they're going to be friendly or hostile. This means that things are a bit more interesting and confusing for players. They don't know quite how to react. They have to navigate the social situation every time. And it means that you're not just going to be bashing things over the head constantly. Our final section is a monster manual, adversaries. There's lots of examples right here, but what I love is that it doesn't just give you examples, it gives you the math and it gives you the procedure for designing your own monsters. The basic categories are you got mooks, which are weaker than PCs, bosses, which are about as equal to one, mega boss, which is strong enough to fight an entire party, and colossuses, which are huge creatures, which again, can fight a whole party. Love these diagrams showing the relative sizes of monsters. It makes everything very concrete and visual. We got everything from rank 10 mega bosses in here. We have lots of different special abilities and powers, so you can fight an entire party with them, down to smaller stuff like blitzer swarms, right? It's a tiny little bug, but it operates as a hive that flies around you. Monsters all have quick little stat blocks over here, and then all of their special abilities are usually kept on 1 or 2 pages, and they're made very easy to reference. You never really have to look up special abilities or spells that are elsewhere in the book. Everything is always contained there, so you can run it really easily. I love how the mood table for each of the monsters is tailored to it specifically. So it's not always just, non-combative and combative. It has false bravado and vengeful. So there's flavor that's attached to the monster that helps you run it. Like if you roll a middle result here, it's preoccupied. There is a duel between rival blaster mages. The surviving mage will be jubilant, but their mood will change if the PCs challenge or question them in any way. You got a big hippo creature here like a Champa. We have the Chosen One, who is definitely not Link from The Legend of Zelda. Just a really nice assortment of monsters. Lots of variety, different types of tactics, different shapes, different colors. It really gives you a sense of the possibilities in terms of coming up with, whatever your imagination can run wild with when you're creating monsters for this system. There's a whole category called kill servants, like a murder maid or the battle butler. Master villains like the oppressor or the pedagogue, if you want to fight a kind of archmage type character. Mundy Mutts, the mange bandit, the proud hound sellsword. You can meet Skelemans or Skelemasters or Skelemonarchs. Here's a good example of a Colossus where you have its big shell right here. It's all made up of crystals. It has a stinging tail. It has legs. So you can decide how you want to approach it, right? You want to try and cripple its legs. You want to try and take out its tail. You want to get on top of it and try and crack your way through the shell to get at the nightmare crystal in the very center. It's up to you. And like I said, plenty of guidance on creating your own monsters. What's your concept? What's your combat values? What is it going to drop? What is the math that you're going to use here? How do you adjust things when you have a tiny species or a massive species or colossal species, right? These are sizes that are outside of the normal PC range, so you're gonna have to adjust their abilities and their stats accordingly. And I love this section right here, reskinning. How to take a standard monster from the monster manual in this book and change it to fit what you want in your campaign with very little effort. And of course, plenty of random tables to help you do all of that. The appendix at the back is super useful. We got our character sheet right here, but also we have most of the important information in the book all summarized onto some very dense pages. And I love this because you can print these out, hand them out to the players, and it makes things much easier to reference. For example, gear list. Here's how all of the basic gear work, their costs, any special stats that you need to know about, and all of the rules right here. Game basics, how to run checks, how to explore, how to negotiate, how to fight. It's all right here. So you don't have to flip through the book. You can just have a handout that runs it for you. And look at this index at the back. It's magnificent. It's like 8 pages long. It's super detailed. It has every important concept that I was able to find. It's all in here, really easy to reference. So how do I summarize Break? Like I said, I've been waiting for this book for 10 years and it has not disappointed me. This is the most beautiful and functional handbook that I have seen for a role-playing game in years. It was also my most entertaining read in a very long time when it comes to rule books. Usually reading a rule book is not a very exciting process for me. I've read a lot of rule books, but this was fun. All of the art, all of the enthusiasm that's packed into this book got me genuinely excited about the idea of making a character, and I would love to play in a game of this. It's an astonishing labor of love created by 2 people that have managed to create a result that big multi-million-dollar corporations have not been able to pull off. I'm very excited to see where Break goes from here, especially when it comes to adventures. I'm really looking forward to the first published adventure by these authors. I want to see what a full one looks like, and I want to play through it. I should also point out that kids love looking through this book, at least my kids do. They love the art, love the idea of imagining different characters, and I think it would be a really great entry point for anyone. Well, this says 12 and up, but I think 10 and up would be perfectly fine. Well, that's it for this review. If you liked Break and you want to pick up a copy for yourself, I will, of course, put links in the description below where you can get a hold of it. If you want to see more videos like this one, remember to like and subscribe. And if you want to help support Questing Beast, remember you can help support me over on Patreon. And you can also get my free Questing Beast monthly newsletter. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.